Welcome back to Camp Kids Club 25. Glad you're with us today because I bet you there's a lot of boys and girls out there that have looked at a comic book. Well, if you've looked at some X-Men comic books, I bet you may have seen some artwork by comic book artist John Byrne. And we had a chance to visit with John Byrne recently. Just take a look at this. And welcome back to Camp Kids Club 25. We're on location with a very special guest today. Our guest is John Byrne from Dark Horse Comics. Welcome to Camp Kids Club 25.
Oh, thank you, Ranger. It's good to be here.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you with us. And tell us, how did you first get involved in comic drawing?
Well, I've read comic books since I was just a little kid. I grew up in England, first saw comics there, moved to Canada, saw more comics. And then one day, I guess I was about 21 years old or so, I was in college, and I suddenly thought, people do this for a living. People draw comics and get paid for it. Maybe I can do that. And that was pretty much how I got into it.
Okay, so you waited until your college years to get started. Well, how did you first get involved in comic book drawing?
As I say, I've been reading them all my life. I've been doodling, drawing the characters just like all kids do in the margins of my notebooks and all that in school when I should have been studying. And eventually reached a point where I felt that I was good enough that I could actually submit my work, send in my work to the publishers, which are mostly based in New York in those days, and they looked at it and they said, "You're terrible, go away." But I kept sending it in, and eventually I wore them down and they gave me work.
So persistence pays off.
Persistence always pays off.
So you're also a writer. How did you make that transition?
I've always thought of myself pretty much as a writer who draws rather than an artist who writes, and I really wanted to be a famous novelist when I grew up, and I managed to get a couple of novels published finally, but they're real scary, kids, so don't read them till you're about 18. And they were fairly successful, and I've got an editor at Dell Books who keeps chasing after me saying, "When can I get another one?" And I say, "Well, when I don't have so much comic book stuff to do, I'll write another novel."
It's important for boys and girls to have an imagination. How important is having an imagination to create comics?
It's kind of like when you're doing a comic book, it's kind of like you're making a movie, but you're doing everything. You're designing the sets, you're designing the costumes, you're making up the story, and of course you're playing all the parts, because you have to put yourself into the characters' heads, as it were, to make sure that they act the way they do and they talk to each other the way they should, and they are themselves all the time. So a lot of people in comic books are frustrated actors. So we all want to be in the movies, but this gives us the chance to do that without actually being in the movies.
And I'm sure a lot of boys and girls are familiar with your work. You've worked in the past on famous comics like X-Men.
X-Men.
Of course, that's big and famous. And did you have anything to do with the X-Men that's on Fox?
Well, a lot of what is being done with the animated version is adaptations of some of the stories that a writer named Chris Claremont and I did in the X-Men about, oh boy, 10 years ago now, 10, 12 years ago now. The X-Men used to be a very small book that hardly anybody read. And then Chris Claremont and an artist named Dave Cockrum started to do it, and it got a little more popular, and then I did it with Chris, and it got a little more popular, and then other artists did it with Chris, and it got even more popular, until now it's the best-selling comic in America, and of course, the highest-rated kids show.
Of course, we encourage all the boys and girls about teamwork, working with other people. Tell us about it, and you have to work with other writers and stuff like that in comics.
Yeah, there are as many as 5 or 6 different steps, 5 or 6 different people involved in the production of a comic. More and more nowadays, as it was at the very beginning of the industry, you have the writer and the artist as the same person. But pretty much for the most part, you have a writer, you have a penciler, you have an inker, who is the one who puts ink on the pencil so that you can print it. You have a letterer, you have a colorist, you have an editor, you have a guy who staples it together. An awful lot of chances to do it wrong. But there's all those people work together ultimately to produce that little book that you hold in your hand every month.
And of course they increase in value, so we want to have all the boys and girls take care of them.
Take care of your comic books. Well, take care of all your books. Take care of all the things you treasure so that you'll always have them.
And you also worked on Fantastic Four and
Superman, Batman, Spider-Man.
What can we look forward from you in the future?
Well, coming up in February, I have a new book coming through Dark Horse called Danger Unlimited. So all you Danger Rangers, get out there and get Danger Unlimited. This is a superhero team that's set in 2 different times. One is set in the past and one is set in the far future. And it's full of all kinds of crazy stuff with people with superpowers and strange aliens and spaceships and all the big cosmic stuff that kids have so much fun with, and so much fun to draw.
That's something to look forward to. Maybe Ranger Roger could make an appearance.
Maybe he could. You never know.
But, well, that's great. And, of course, encouragement is real important. Did your parents encourage you to draw?
My earliest memory, in fact, is of my grandfather, my father's father. When I was about 2 or 3 years old, he used to hold me on his lap and hold my hand with a piece of chalk in it and draw on a chalkboard. And I always feel like that's what started it. That's what got the genes working, was my grandfather drawing while holding my hand.
Oh, that's a great memory.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for any boys and girls who want to be up-and-coming comic book artists?
I guess the best advice I can give to anybody who wants to be anything is to just never give up. If you set your sights on something, you pick your goal, and you just go after it. That's what I did to get into comics, and I think that's what you do to get into anything.
Okay. Mr. John Byrne from Dark Horse Comics, a pleasure to have you on Camp Kids Club 25. Now, don't go away. More fun coming up right here on Camp Kids Club 25.